Lake Champlain is a 125-mile-long body of fresh water that resides in the states of Vermont and New York. When most people think about strange events around the lake, they tend to think of the legendary dinosaur-like creature, Champ, which many believe either once lived in the lake or still does. As there's been over 300 sightings of Champ over the years, the lake has experienced some UFO activity as well. In particular, one famous sighting occurred in the summer of 1968. In today's episode, we will examine the UFO sighting and alien abduction that occurred at Bluff Ledge, a girls' camp, that year. On August 7th, 1968, at Bluff Ledge Summer Camp, located in Burlington, Vermont, two teenagers had an experience that would change their lives forever. Michael Lapp, a maintenance man, and water ski instructor Janet Cornell were enjoying a quiet day on the lake. The day was quiet at the camp since the swim team had left earlier in the day to attend a swim meet. Michael, then 16 years old, and Janet, then 19 years old, were resting and watching the sunset when suddenly a bright light would appear up in the sky. The two initially believed that it was the planet Venus. However, unexpectedly, the light started hovering downward. Then it began to flatten out and appear as a cigar shape. Then 3 smaller lights seemed to break off from the bigger light. The 3 lights then started moving around the lake in surprising ways. They were zigzagging, doing fast loops, and also doing some bizarre maneuvers which clearly reflected that they were being controlled somehow. Then the objects formed a triangle and began approaching Michael and Janet. The two were more curious at the time than worried or scared. 2 of the lights in the triangle appeared to stay back, and one headed right for them. But before reaching them, it shot upward and seemingly disappeared. The object hadn't vanished though. A moment later, the object could be seen across the lake. It then flew down into the water, staying submerged for several minutes before coming out of the water. Once again, the object flew at the 2 teenagers, but this time was much closer. The 2 could see beings in a transparent dome structure on the craft. Michael described the beings as being similar in appearance to children, but having elongated necks, huge eyes that wrapped around their heads, large heads, and also bald. The beings telepathically communicated with Michael and told him they were not here to hurt them, but were interested in obtaining an energy source. The craft then shot down a beam of light at the 2, terrifying them. The beam was extremely bright, and Michael said it was so bright he could see the bones in his hand, like an X-ray. It also was described by the 2 as liquid, as if it would allow them to float freely. As the light was coming down, Michael grabbed Janet's shoulder and pulled her backward onto the dock in an effort to protect her. They were both terrified and knew they were in danger of being taken. Then the 2 found themselves sitting on the dock, and the big craft was at the edge of the lake. Oddly though, now it was pitch dark, whereas their last memory, the sun was setting. Michael would look over at Janet, and she was in a trance. The UFO moved up into the sky, and the light flew away in the blink of an eye. The next few minutes, a van pulled up, as the swim team had returned. Michael and Janet, both teenagers, did not discuss what happened to them, nor what they saw. In time, the friends went their separate ways. Michael wouldn't be able to forget what happened to him that night though. He kept having horrible nightmares that wouldn't go away. Somehow he knew his nightmares were related to that night. In his nightmares, he was being abducted by something, and despite his pleas not to be taken, the being still did. When Michael was 26 years old, he contacted the Center for UFO Studies and requested help. Walter Webb would investigate the case and suggest hypnotic regression in order to recover more memories. Webb would say he was originally skeptical since the story came 10 years after the event. Also, the claims seemed to align with many other alien abduction stories, and this case seemed too good to be true. In the hypnotic regression sessions, Michael recalled being lifted by the beam into one of the crafts. Once he was inside the ship, he saw Janice laying on one of the tables. Janice was being studied by the beings. They were shining a light in her eyes. They also appeared to be taking skin samples and extracting blood from her body. According to Michael, all the beings looked alike, with two massive large eyes, no mouth, and two holes where the nose should be. With no mouth, it's assumed the beings communicated telepathically with one another. The beings would inform Michael their goal was to make life here on Earth like their life. Janet too would eventually undergo hypnotic regression. She too would remember the abduction and being on a cold table. She recalled something pulling her hair and pinching her neck. Walter Webb would end up writing a 300-page book on the story and publish it in the 1994 book, Encounter at Bluff Ledge, a UFO Case History. In general, it seems something happened to Michael Lapp and Janet Cornell on August 7th, 1968. While both individuals didn't report this initially, it appears the suppressing of their memories caused immense psychological pain for both of them. Many may question their story and the timing though. Still, this appears to be a double-edged sword. If they had reported very different characteristics than what most alien abductees report, critics would have said their case was too bizarre or too unusual. Also, many have pointed out that both Michael and Janet had moved in different directions. By all accounts, the two weren't in touch and probably wouldn't have been able to coordinate a made-up story like this. Not to mention, perhaps one would be able to avoid hypnosis and create this story, but two people seems extremely unlikely. On top of that, the details of Michael's session were kept from Janet, yet Janet produced details extremely similar to Michael's story. All this lends evidence to the theory both were abducted that night for a short time. As mentioned, this case has many similar characteristics as many other abduction cases. If you're looking for more details surrounding the case, they can be obtained through the 1994 book, Encounter at Bluff Ledge, a UFO Case History by Walter Webb.